Today I want to talk about a powerful tool in estate planning for blended families, the Qualified Terminable Interest Property Trust, or QTIP Trust. If you're part of a blended family and want to protect both your spouse and your children from a previous marriage, a QTIP trust could be a critical piece of your estate plan. Let's start with the basics. A QTIP trust allows you to provide for your current spouse after you pass away, while still ensuring that your children, whether they're from a previous marriage or a relationship, receive an inheritance after your spouse's death. This makes it ideal for blended families, where you want to balance caring for your spouse and protecting the assets intended for your biological children. So how does it work? When you pass away, the assets you place in the QTIP trust are available for your surviving spouse's benefit. The key here is that your spouse has access to the income generated by the trust for or other limited financial support, but they don't have control over the underlying assets. The assets remain protected within the trust. Importantly, they cannot be passed on to somebody else, even if your spouse remarries or rewrites their own estate plan. Once your spouse passes away, the remaining assets in the trust go directly to the beneficiaries that you named, usually your children from a previous relationship. This structure ensures that your spouse is taken care of, but your children ultimately receive the inheritance that you intend for them. Now, why is it especially important for blended families? Without a QTIP trust or similar arrangement, there's a risk that your assets could end up going to someone else entirely, leaving your children with little or nothing. This often happens if you leave everything outright to your spouse and rely on them to divide the estate between your children and theirs. In blended families, where the children are from different relationships, it's common to worry about your surviving spouse remarrying or changing their estate plan to benefit their children after you pass away. A QTIP trust eliminates that risk because you retain control over where your assets go and when your spouse passes away. You ensure that your children receive their inheritance no matter what. Now let's talk about one of the most critical decisions you make when you're setting up a QTIP trust, choosing the trustee. The trustee of your QTIP trust will be responsible for managing the trust's assets, distributing income to your spouse, and eventually ensuring that the remaining assets go to your children or other beneficiaries. Here are some key options and considerations when you're choosing a trustee. Your surviving spouse. Many people consider naming their surviving spouse as a trustee since they want their spouse to manage their own financial needs. However, there's a potential conflict of interest. Your spouse might want to access more of the assets than the trust allows, which could reduce what's left for your children. If you're confident that your spouse will act responsibly and there's a high level of trust, this can be a good option, but if there's any doubt, it's worth considering other choices. Professional or independent trustees are another option. A professional trustee, such as a bank or a trust company, offers a more neutral option. There is no personal interest in the trust assets, and their experience in managing trust is much greater than that of your spouse. This option helps avoid conflicts of interest, ensures that both your spouse's needs and your children's inheritances are handled impartially. The downside is that professional trustees charge fees for their services, but in more complex or larger estates, their expertise can outweigh the costs, especially if they're making investment decisions. Co-trustees. You could name both your spouse and a professional trustee manage the trust. This arrangement balances giving your spouse some control while ensuring that there's oversight from a neutral party, and it can help reduce the conflict, which allows your spouse to access the trust income. Just be mindful that co-trustees may sometimes disagree, which could cause delays in decisions or, worse yet, lawsuits. Family members or trusted friends are another good choice if they're not a beneficiary, because they won't have that same conflict of interest. They may be more familiar with the family dynamics and can provide a more personal touch than a corporate trustee would. However, that person needs to be financially savvy, impartial, and needs to have a good head on their shoulders. Each option has its pros and cons, and the right choice depends on your family dynamics, the complexity of your estate, and the level of trust that you have in the individual that you name. So just to recap, if you want your spouse to have the most control and feel comfortable managing the assets, you might choose them as the trustee. Just be sure to consider the potential for conflicts of interest. If impartiality and experience are the most important choices for you, a professional trustee might be the best choice, especially if the estate is complex. If you want a balance, co-trustees such as your spouse and a neutral professional can offer the best of both worlds. Choosing the right trustee is critical because they're the ones that are going to make the decisions about how the trust is managed, how the assets are distributed. If you're unsure which option is right for your situation, consulting with an attorney like myself is essential. In summary, if you're in a blended family and you're concerned about balancing the financial needs of your spouse with the inheritance you want to leave for your kids, a QTIP trust can provide that balance. It's a way to ensure that your spouse is cared for during their lifetime while protecting your children's right to inherit. If you're unsure whether a QTIP trust is right for your situation, or if you have questions about how to set one up, feel free to reach out. We can walk through your options, make sure your estate plan works for you and your family, both now and in the future. Thanks for watching, and if you're thinking about estate planning for a blended family, I'd love to help guide you through the process. Reach out to us today and let's talk about how we can protect your family and your legacy.